Hello, my name is Elian Yentoft, otherwise known by the creator/stage name Eve Ghost. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I want to thank you for coming to my talk engaging with Under the Surface at surface level, or what happens when nobody knows it's a game. I want to talk about my alternate reality game Under the Surface, but more importantly, I want to encourage creators to reflect more deeply upon ethical considerations when developing immersive storytelling projects, especially those which tackle sensitive themes, and that is a lot of them. I don't claim to be an expert in ethical gaming. My background is more in research ethics. But with this walkthrough, I hope to lead by example and show you the considerations I took into account while building such a project, and kick off a discussion that I often find lacking in ARGs. How can we foster an ethical approach to the genre? How can we design more ethical games without pulling players out of the experience? Before I begin, I want to give a warning that Under the Surface deals with themes of suicide, mental illness, and substance abuse. That said, I'll be talking about how choices I made in the design of Under the Surface took the ethics of telling difficult stories into account at every step of the way. This is where we start. A gig poster. Looks normal, right? I mean, other than that it's in some weird Scandinavian language, but there's an artist. Never heard of him, but that's not so unusual. There's a tour name, albeit for the fall of 2014, making a sudden appearance in 2021. There's a venue, but what? At closer inspection, the venue doesn't exist in this city. In fact, it appears to be a parody of an existing venue. The show is free. The poster itself asks, "Vad fan är detta för nu?" Or, in English, "What the heck is this? Is this person even real?" The QR code on the poster leads you here. At a glance, Under the Surface appears to be your typical musician webpage. Most people who land here don't even perceive that this is an illustration. It has many of the typical features of a musician's webpage. In fact, it has everything from a collection of lyrics to a discography and a press page. It has old interviews. It releases new chapters every month. Okay. And this About page raises more questions than answers, really. Okay, so there's already something off about it. At the same time, it poses as a real website with interactive characters who are responsible for its authorship, maintenance, and creation. For one example, if you write to the website's contact email, the protagonist's manager will respond. Should you choose to dig in deeper, it reveals itself to be an alternate reality game. For people who may be new to the terminology, an ARG is a game that uses elements of the real world to tell a story while involving some form of puzzle or gameplay to advance the plot, or in the case of Under the Surface, to reveal more content and provide insights the average reader would miss out on should they fail to realize this. This project relies heavily upon media archaeology as a gameplay feature. If you want to find hidden elements, you have to click around and examine the source code, essentially. Occasionally, you'll have to solve something to progress towards the prize, but ultimately, you could ignore that aspect and opt not to play, and just enjoy the surface-level content. In that case, its hybrid nature means that it becomes something akin to immersive e-literature. However, if you want to dig much deeper into the experience, you need to play. Under the Surface is a very story-based project. It has a massive amount of content and Easter eggs spanning multiple websites. The story focuses upon once famous American/Swedish indie rock star Axel Lundén, whose career has disintegrated in the wake of his husband Mika's death, an apparent act of suicide. Still deep in his mourning and already on a path to self-destruction, he decides to meet a similar end on the second anniversary of Mika's death. However, the audience eventually learns that Axel has repressed the memory of the night his husband died. The players are then tasked with uncovering and piecing together aspects of what really happened, so they, along with Axel, can process it and move on, something that I feel well represents the experience of recovery from deeply traumatic experiences. Now, I strongly believe that these kinds of stories need to be told, not only to lift some of the stigma that comes from silencing these experiences, but to inform loved ones of someone going through depression who perhaps have never had that kind of experience themselves, what it feels like, and how they might help someone through it. I have an academic background in psychology and global mental health, especially LGBTQIA+ health issues, and so approaching this topic with a degree of realness, but also from an ethical standpoint, was important to me. I wanted to create something that could offer reflection, provoke interaction with others, and ultimately give hope. Considering the sensitive topic and that immersion and realism is so valued in this medium, I realized that I would need to think through what could go wrong and how the story and everything from its fragmented content and the web design itself could potentially impact the player. Some ARGs and adjacent genres don't have the best track record of this, and what immediately springs to mind is the Slender Man web series inspired trope which is sometimes used by creators who I imagine don't quite think through the deeply problematic side of such tropes. Moreover, I've observed that these communities tend to have a high number of LGBTQIA plus players, and the statistics worldwide show that people who fall under that umbrella are much more likely to have considered, attempted, or completed suicide. That's why sensitive consideration was important to me in making this project. But I'd like to walk you through the process I used as I built ethics into the design of the game storytelling experience. Of course, one can provide a classic trigger warning, but the ARG community does not require it, although it is becoming more common. This is my story page right here. And here, ultimately, as the page loads, we have a trigger warning. I wanted to include it while also using it as a way to ask the players to reflect upon their current mindset and consider if they might be better off accessing the mental health resources in their current state. Not only that, but I made it so that you have to approve it every time you return to this page to select a new chapter. Kind of annoying, perhaps, but I want people to reflect on where they are emotionally, since it's a very emotionally challenging story. Although this is a genre that expects immersion and realness, all the same, I fear that people might genuinely think this was real. This was a real musician who perhaps had died. Indeed, what happens if nobody knows it's a game? For example, this quote from a chat in a server full of players, and I did get permission for this. Don't know jack about this or who Oxalune Dan is, but if the main site for this ARG has stuff like this, I think I have a good suspicion on what his being alive status is like, and they're pointing to the mental health resources page. Of course, this person knows it's an ARG, but what if they didn't? So, how do you give realism while also delivering subtle clues to the player that they are indeed dealing with fiction? To start, I decided that all images associated with the project would be illustrations, albeit highly photorealistic. When actual photographs are utilized, they are heavily filtered to fit the theme of a watercolor painting or drawing. I chose watercolor not necessarily because the protagonist's husband died by drowning, but because my experience of depression was one of feeling like a person drowning, unseen but in plain sight. My protagonist experiences it the same way. But also I thought of tears as infiltrating the imagery as well. As my colleague Ren Dalton so succinctly put it, the character is being looked through, yet visually is encased within water. Every asset has a similar motif, which includes any associated social media accounts for the project. If it is a character, the images will have a certain aesthetic quality, also to signal to the player that yes, this is a character that belongs to this particular project, a signature, if you will. Does this impact immersion? Well, I can only respond in light of what players have told me and how I've seen them interact with the characters, and actually the answer is no. That the images are to some degree photorealistic may help, but I've witnessed players interacting with or speaking of characters as if they were actually real people with feelings, and they're invested in them and the story. Another feature that unintentionally created a therapeutic response was the way the button at the end of the story chapter lifts you to the top of the page, allowing the reader to symbolically resurface. One reader told me candidly that she found this feature to be cathartic, like a reminder to take a deep breath after reading. Essentially another cue to the reader/player to reflect. However, I hadn't considered that it would impact the way the audience experiences the project by serving an unintended positive emotional purpose. With such projects, it's important to think out what could go wrong in advance. One thing about ARGs is that they tend to have communities of people who work together to solve things and discuss theories, often via a Discord server. Things that can potentially go wrong can be as simple as someone misunderstanding the nature of the project, a failure to solve a puzzle and unlock content, or they can be more problematic, such as dangerous theories. For example, deciding that one should go check out locations in real life that are not safe for access, or believing that the story is real and taking action based upon what one reads into the story. One recent example of this is when Matthew Patrick from The Game Theorists proposed that an ARG was lurking in the series of Five Nights at Freddy's books, and that it pointed towards a particular small town. This resulted in members of the game theory community calling random businesses in the area. Given the readership numbers for that YouTube channel, it quickly rose to the level of harassment, with town members begging his audience to stop. I consider this especially important because Under the Surface has such a sense of place in it. I utilize projects in Google Earth as a storytelling device, often marking out real but rather common, publicly accessible and safe places around the world. But additionally, one may also want to intervene if a player reaches out for help in personal ways, considering the content of the story. And to anticipate and avoid problems and also not break immersion, I decided to make 3 characters interactable to serve the purpose of helpers and managers. One of them is literally Axel's manager, Lars. He responds to all emails from the contact link on the website. I wanted to ensure that there was a point of contact for someone if they were having a hard time or simply had questions about what's going on with this strange website they stumbled upon. Oddly enough, I've been contacted by various mental health and drug addiction services asking if Axel could include them in the mental health services page. Lars responds in a way you would expect a manager to respond, formally, with general information. He's the boring one. You might ask, is this ethical to have a fictional character respond to simple emails? I don't feel that general inquiries are necessarily problematic, since people are more than willing to talk to generic chatbots for receiving information. Corey Janssen, one of the lead characters, is the protagonist's bass player and best friend, but he's also a web designer as his day job, as stated in his social media profiles. It didn't take long for some players to figure out that he is indeed the one responsible for the website and that he was the one hiding commentary in the source code. He occasionally asks for help finding bugs, real or intentional, but also because he can see the basic access data for some pages, he will know if certain content was found and surmise from that data whether a puzzle was left unsolved. If something significant goes undiscovered for a long period, he will give hints by way of being a bit of a meme lord, and indeed, they have asked him for hints when they really become stuck. The players seem to have quite enjoyed interacting with him, often treating him as a real person, even granting him a nickname, which he willfully adopted, Nerd Jerk. Additionally, this character is a bit meta in that he knows that he has hidden the content. He is essentially ARG aware, which enables him to interact feasibly with its players. Just why he's doing this is probably part of the mystery, but that's barely been probed at this point. Lastly, I made the character Maya interactable. She only plays a minor role in the actual story as one of several mega fans. However, on Twitter and via Facebook group, she's attempting to solve the mystery of why posters for Axel's old shows have turned up all over multiple European cities, and why his website has reverted to 2014. I put her in there not only to enlist engagement, but to correct issues with players if something were to go wrong, like the aforementioned hunting for GPS coordinates, to answer questions about Axel's history from the viewpoint of a fan, and for practical help. For example, explaining details they may need to know about Scandinavian culture. Lastly, she's a psychology student, so should some difficult issues arise that could use someone to intervene and direct them towards more professional help, she would step in and play that role. Interactive characters, of course, are nothing new in this field. They're pretty much a mainstay, but I believe that the reflexive use of characters to handle potential ethical situations is relatively novel. Oddly enough, another unexpected thing happened. I intentionally broke the previously existing and since thankfully discarded rules of ARGs and putting myself forth as the creator, both via social media and Patreon. Until quite recently, you see, alternate reality games have operated under the credo, "This is not a game," or TINAG, as it's sometimes called. With TINAG, one must behave at all times as if the project is real, but this creates a conundrum for creators. Not only could creators operating under this credo not claim ownership of the project until it was completed, which raises real questions about accountability, but it made promotion of such projects incredibly difficult. And there's another ethical conundrum that can arise from this. For example, there was a case with one project, Fantastic Daily, which posed as one of those top 10 paranormal video channels that are so common on YouTube. It slowly began to release content for the phenomenon Black-Eyed Kids, building up into a story about one family's encounter with them. The paranormal community latched onto this, believing it was real. When they discovered it was not, they were furious, doxing the creator, which resulted in him abandoning the project before it could reach completion. I certainly didn't want this to happen to Under the Surface, and thankfully the adherence to TINAG had also begun to fade around the time I released this project. But a lovely thing also arose from being upfront with my role as the creator. Players will sometimes reach out with personal messages or interact with me on social media. I've been told more than once that my accessibility as a creator was beneficial in processing the story's themes, and so I enacted an ethic of care for the participants just by being present and honest as the game's creator, which is why I strongly advocate for other creators to engage with their audience. Not only can this help create a safe space for engaging with difficult stories, but it can help creators to read the room and spot problems before they grow out of proportion, like a weed that strangulates the life out of a project, as was the case with Fantastic Daily. Now, of course, I cannot observe every group of people who interact with this project, and thus far the project has remained small enough to be manageable, but that tends to be the case with most ARGs. Some will choose to go it alone and not play in groups, but my hope is that there are enough fail-safes built in to guide those invisible players as well. In closing, I spent many years on the fence about whether or not I should release this story because it does deal with trauma in such an intimate way. I was terrified that something bad might happen connected to it, that it would be misconstrued, or that it might trigger negative responses in the players. If you also fear such problems with your narratives, you might start as I did, by asking the help of sensitivity readers to ensure that the story itself will not cause more harm than good. Despite these fears, I've witnessed how this project has helped some members of its audience to process their own feelings and offered a community space within which to do so. I believe difficult stories should be told. We should not be silent on the issue of suicide for the sake of not triggering people. Instead, we should provide the audience with the tools to make the decision about whether they are ready to tackle those stories, which they can do if A, they are made aware of them, and B, if they are guided through them with ethical design. And we should carefully deliberate over the stories we choose to tell in this format. Furthermore, I believe the power of immersive storytelling and team gameplay that occurs in an ARG circle has the potential to create avenues of collective discussion, openness, learning, and healing in ways that simply reading a work of e-literature or book alone could not quite do, although there's certainly power in that too. I put forth this talk today as a call to action to other creators of immersive fiction to consider ethics. Indeed, consider the player, their realities, their emotions, and their struggles as you create, and remember to incorporate ethical design in immersive storytelling. Although I didn't have time to run through all of the considerations and concerns that inform the design of elements in this project today, I hope that the few I was able to provide can offer creators a tiny morsel of food for thought. Thank you.